continues to be a difficult couple of weeks. This past week for me has had some ups and downs. Some of you may know I was away in Ottawa at the CJA conference against anti-Semitism. It's been organized for a long time, and obviously the agenda changed and focused instead of just anti-Semitism in general, but particularly on recent events and the local response to them. The massacre and kidnapping of Israeli civilians by Hamas terrorists. And at the conference, it was reassuring to hear all the different speakers talk about all the good that was being done. Particularly, it was reassuring to hear the promise from our political leaders who spoke there, speaking out against hatred, promising to commit to fight anti-Semitism globally and locally, to fight for the victims of Hamas's crimes. But I'm not sure how many of those promises, those words, will be forgotten or will turn into actions in the coming days and weeks. While we were there to discuss anti-Semitism, there were those protesting outside, protesting against the Israeli oppressor, shouting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Well, we talked about parents who'd lost their children. Well, we talked about people that had been massacred, people that had been kidnapped and still were not yet home. I'm all for free speech, and I'm for the right to peacefully assemble. But I really have to wonder what the intentions are of someone who chooses not just to protest, but to protest outside a conference against anti-Semitism the week of October 7th and shout Free Palestine. My heart goes out to many Palestinian civilians who are victims of Hamas as much as the Israelis are and Jews are. But to stand outside a conference to fight anti-Semitism and shout that, to block the door and disrupt it, so that the police have to tell us we have to leave through the back door of the convention center because they fear it's not safe for us to go out the front. I have to wonder how many of those there were there to fight for civilian rights and how many were there because they support Hamas's crimes. How many see Hamas as freedom fighters? How many of them really believe that the children who were massacred in their beds and their cribs were combatants responsible for the conditions of civilians in Gaza? When I was walking to the conference on the second day, I had planned to walk by the Parliament building around sunset so I could see it and snap some photos. I'm still a tourist here in Canada. But that was where they decided to gather to start their march over to the conference center. So as I was deciding what I should do, a police officer stopped me and asked, "You're not going to cross the street, right?" And I decided it probably wasn't good too. But I had to think, would I not be allowed to? If I had said, yes, I want to, would I have been stopped? Whose rights were being protected in those moments? I wanted to know where all the politicians who spoke to us, who stood up and said they would make sure that the Jewish voice was heard in Canada, where they stood on the issue of us hiding, walking out the back door for safety. I watched as every major media outlet immediately blamed Israel for the hospital that was bombed in Gaza. I want to know where those politicians stood on that. I was surprised when after the conference I looked at my phone and was catching up on news to see our Prime Minister's statements. He had seemed to condemn Israel shortly before he stood in front of a crowd of us and promised his support. Now, long after the United States and others have declared that this was not a war crime committed by Israel, but a misfire of a rocket intended to murder and kill Israeli civilians, he's slowly taking his time to get it right. He wants to make sure all the facts are in. I really wish he had taken his time to get the facts before he spoke the first time. We as a Jewish community around the world and locally have been doing an incredible job of giving to support those in Israel. Here in Toronto, we've given more than $60 million to United Jewish Appeal's Emergency Fund for Israel. I'm pleased to say, if you've not been following the updates from the fund, that 100% of the funds donated go to support those in need. And this was $60 million was on top of 42 tons of emergency supplies that were given as well. Last week, they dispersed $10 million of those dollars. It's in the form of emergency grants to victims of terrorism and traumatized communities, protective equipment, emergency kits for first responders, supplies for Israelis from the Gaza border that are now being sheltered in host communities who had to leave without food, clothing, medicine, baby products. All the supplies they needed because they were evacuated from the war zone. Trauma and emotional first aid for not just the devastated residents, but also for the frontline workers who are seeing devastation none of us can imagine. This week, they dispersed another $4.5 million, critical services for evacuees from Sderot and other communities near Gaza, purchases of food and baby products, medical equipment, evacuations of Israelis living with disabilities from communities near Gaza who couldn't leave before, equipment to help aid in the recovery, the identification, and the burial of victims. It's tremendous work what they are doing. And they're not the only organization. UJA is partnering with many organizations on the ground in Israel, as are organizations and synagogues here in Toronto, partnering with many different organizations and places. Some of you may have seen this week we did a Zoom call online, Beth Torah, with an organization in Israel, the Organization for Victims of Terrorism. And our synagogue has a bit of a relationship in advance with this group. Their Canadian half, IVOW, takes these kids, bar bat mitzvah age, who have somehow been impacted by war and terrorism in Israel, whether it's that they were injured or a family member or their house or whatever it is, and brings them to spend the summer in Canada. And the last day of their trip for the last 2 summers, they've come here for a party and a celebration here at Beth Torah. It's a tremendous program, and it's a mitzvah that we're involved in that. But the organization that's there in Israel does more, not just for the bar and bat mitzvah age kids who are victims of terror, but they're the official charity and organization of the Israeli government to help those who have been victimized in a terrorist attack. Their roster includes thousands of people, because thousands of Israelis have been attacked over the years. The Israeli Organization for Victims of Terrorism, they have thousands, tens of thousands on their roster of those who've been injured over the decades that we've been facing this. In just one day, thousands more will have to be added to their list. So think about that. It's a tremendous organization. I encourage you to watch on our YouTube page some of the videos that came from that conversation. We hope to have more with them in the future. And opportunities for you to learn not just what IVOW does when they bring those bar and bat mitzvah age Israelis here over the summer, but the incredible work their parent organization in Israel does on the front lines. But beyond the incredible support that we're doing as a community, the money raised, the donations, there's something more that's needed. There's a war going on right now, not just in Israel, but there's a war going on social media. There's a war going on our university campuses and in our workplaces. There's a war for public opinion. And that's where Israel really needs us right now. That's where they really need us. One of those who spoke at the conference is a gentleman named Chen Mazig. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Chen. He's got a very large social media following online and posts very much about Israel and combating some of the lies and misinformation that's out there. And when this happened and Israelis were called up to return to their units in the reserve, he called his commander, who said to him, "We know what you're doing over there. We need you there. We need you speaking out to your followers. We need you over there more than another body here." Because the truth is, no matter how strong and powerful the IDF is, Israel needs the support of the world community. And we've seen how quickly those have faded in just the days after the attack, days after the massacre. Voices that stood with us now speaking for those on the other side. There's a war for public opinion, and we need to participate in that war, each and every one of us. One of the things one of the speakers did at the conference was an interesting exercise, which I want to try. He asked us, who has social media? Raise your hand. You have some social media account of some kind. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, some page of some sort. X, I guess, is the new one. Pretty much everyone's hand in the room went up. If you have at least 10 followers on that account, let's keep our hands up for a second. 20? 30? If 50 of us had 10 followers, it's 500 people we can reach. 20, it's 1,000. The truth is, we have many more than that. We don't need to be someone like Chen Mazig with 1 million followers to make a difference. What we need is each of us to participate in this. Each and every person. And it's not just online on social media posting platitudes, but it's making sure that the truth is out there. It's when you see someone post that Israel bombed a hospital and killed nearly 500 civilians to stand up with the truth and say, that's not true. That's not what happened. To have the knowledge and the education, to be invested enough to educate ourselves that we can speak out and speak the truth because we know the facts and we can correct the disinformation when it's there. We're never going to change those who are the extremists. But there are many people who don't know enough about what's happening, who just see something on Instagram and that's what forms their opinion. They're the ones we can reach. They're the ones we can change. Our coworkers and our classmates, our friends, extended family members, they're the people we need to be speaking to and talking to and sharing the truth with. Making sure they don't forget who started this fight. Making sure they don't forget the reason why Israel needs to ensure its borders are secure. Because children were butchered in their beds. Women were raped. Elderly were killed and murdered in their shelters. We need to speak out because we know that so many others will remain silent when Jewish blood is spilled. And our parsha is a wonderful example of that. Of what it means to speak up. What it means to stand up even when you are alone. Noah stood up. He heard God's call and God's command to build an ark. Everyone else thought he was crazy. He stood there proclaiming the end of days. A flood is coming. Nobody listened. The ark wasn't built instantly. There was time for people to see it, to build their own. But nobody listened. But he did what he believed is right, and the world was changed because of it. The lesson is that a small individual, and all the more a small group of people, really can make a powerful difference. The world was destroyed, but for what Noah did to save it. Rabbi Israel Salanter, a 19th century rabbi and founder of the Musar movement, once said that when he was a young man, when I was a young man, I wanted to change the world. I found it was difficult to change the world. So I tried to change my nation. I found I couldn't change my nation, so I began to focus just on my town. I couldn't change the town, so I tried then to change my family. And now, as an old man, I realize the only thing I can do is change myself. But I realize now that if a long time ago I had changed myself, I could have made an impact on my family, I could have made an impact on our town, and their impact could have changed the nation, and our nation could have changed the world. We can make a difference. One person can. A community can. But we have to use our power to do so. We have to speak up. We can impact others, and it doesn't have to be on a large scale. You don't need 1 million followers to be an influencer. But our brothers and sisters in Israel need us to use our influence. Yesterday, thankfully, 2 of the hostages were released. I fear how many headlines are going to focus on that and not the other nearly 200 who are still missing. It's not so much in the spirit of Shabbat. But I placed out on our seats today these flyers that you may have seen around town or online in different places. Flyers that were made of all those who were kidnapped. Amiran Cooper and Narit Cooper, 84 years and 79 years old. Their families want them back. We want them back. Doron, Aviv, and Raz, 3 young women, a mother 34, and her 4-year-old and 2-year-old. We want them back. Shani Gorin, 29-year-old Israeli woman. We need her back too. Each and every one of them. And we cannot let the world forget. I encourage you to use what you can do, to post, to speak out. Each of us, again, are individuals, but together we can make a difference. Feel free to take a flyer with you. Feel free to go to the website and print more. Stick them up. Don't start confrontations. Put it on a lamppost. Stick it to a bulletin board somewhere. Speak up and speak out. And make sure that these people aren't forgotten, because their families still miss them. You may have seen a powerful display that's going around online in Tel Aviv. Giant Shabbat table with 200 empty seats for each of those who are spending yet another Shabbat as prisoners of Hamas. We can't let the headlines change. We can't let the world forget. Shabbat Shalom.